Good morning and Happy New Year to all of you out there. Starting it off, last week I know that we missed a week, but there was a lot of overdoing it, a lot of sickness, a lot of not feeling well, so we just felt it safe to just everybody stay away, stay home, and just kind of recharge, recuperate, and come back ready more than ever to go. So we're going to continue on in our study in Revelation. We're in the home stretch, I guess you could say, of our study in Revelation. Chapter 17, the last time we met 2 weeks ago, we kind of gave an overview, or I talked a little bit about Babylon and what it means and its historical significance and the different names it has in the Bible and kind of what it stands for in a historical context in parallel to the Israelites, for sure. The idea that it has as a parallel to Israel, especially in theological and historical society, is a very interesting parallel. It is Babylon in man's eyes was a success. And I kind of wanted to harp on that again. Babylon in man's eyes was a roaring success. It was one of the first great civilizations. It had one of the first moral codes from Hammurabi. It had some of the 7 wonders of the world. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon is one of the things that were known. So in man's eyes, Babylon was a roaring success. And it set forth a lot of the way that our city-states and the way that our things were built up and built upon for our in human nature, in human world, and just the way our governments interact and things like that. There is things taken from Babylon, and there's a lot of things built on Babylonian styles from historical context. That it has a greater impact than I think that a lot of people give it credit for. And we know that Revelation will harp on Babylon and what it stands for, and it'll come more to light in Revelation 17 of what it's representing and where it's standing and how it's interacting with the world and things of that nature. But understand that the Babylonian mindset, and this is something that I kind of ended with last week, has permeated human society. And for worse, we know this from the end of what we're about to read, Babylon has a grip on humanity as a whole. The ideas of Babylon, the moral codes, the political and economic systems, the things that we associate with normal, everyday, just culture, of human culture, is permeated with Babylon. We know from history that Christ is rejected, right? The Israelites have been ostracized. These are not controversial statements, at least in my opinion. That the Babylonian way of life has, for all intents and purposes, won in human culture. That is how we have built our culture. We rejected theocratic forms of government. We have rejected these things throughout history. That's not controversial. I hope that you can see that that's where we are founded on. That doesn't mean that you can't be moral, you can't be right, you can't try to follow God in our current forms with a president and a democratic form of society. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's permeated humanity. We are fully in weight of accepting of Babylon's complete rule in Revelation. It's already in place. These things have already taken control of society as a whole. And that's just, it's very interesting to look in history of the parallels between Babylon and Israel, and I know I talked a little bit about that, but between Hammurabi's Code and the 10 Commandments, between the foundations of city-states and the things that they have grown in history, the places that Babylon has been a part of in history, the things that even, the name is blanking out on me now. There's a famous French, Napoleon, I don't know why I forgot, laid eyes on like that was about Armageddon, but basically in that same, that realm of saying that it is a great battlefield. We know that there's Babylon means the gate of God, which is a very interesting and kind of, or gate of the gods. It's a very interesting turn of phrase, right? That it is man's designation of this entrance into what they consider a heavenly state, right? The gate of the gods. That between here and outside, this is where you get to meet beings greater than yourself. So we've seen the position that Babylon thinks that it is. And Revelation 17 takes kind of a pause and pivot, right? So we've seen the vials have finished in Revelation 16. We have seen the wrath of God has been poured out. We've seen that the completion of his judgment here, and that's what John is privy to, right? He's sitting here, he's seen these things, and now we have this pause, because one of the big ending parts of chapter 16 was verse 19. It says, "And great Babylon came into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." And so what chapters 17 and 18 do is, I think, truthfully explain to Israel, to you, to John, not this John, but the other John, this John too, explain specifically what Babylon should mean to Israel, what Babylon should mean to you. Because the Babylonian Empire, I'm going to put that in, not in quotes, but the Babylonian Empire has ended, and I'm going to put that in very loose terms. The Babylonian Empire finished in, I can't remember the exact date, 1750, I think, with Hammurabi putting the capital, expanded along the Euphrates. We've seen that the Babylonian Empire had its roots and then turned into other empires, and those are mentioned for sure in different parts of Daniel and those things. We could go deeper into those, but we won't, with the beasts and the toes and things like that. Yes? And I think in 1750, at the end of Hammurabi. It probably went further. BC, yeah. Sorry. I don't have the exact. I know no one knows the exact dates anyway, because it's all conjecture. But the idea is that the Babylonian Empire has grown to a figurehead of humanity, and the rest, I could say the rest of humanity has pretty much been built on the ideas of the Babylonian Empire and has permeated our society until now. That is kind of how I view Babylon now, as opposed to just this interesting figurehead that's way out in the middle of nowhere and go, oh yeah, Babylon, I know that word. But now it's kind of created a more synonymous relationship with the foundation of the end of the world. That this is who man is in spite of God's leading. That's what Babylon will go, and we'll know a little bit more about that in chapter 17. So that was just kind of some recap and build up into, as we go into chapter 17, we'll read, I don't think we'll read the whole chapter just because there's a lot there that we won't get to today, but let's read the first 5 verses of Revelation chapter 17, and there's some things that I really want to focus on. And it says, Revelation chapter 17, verse 1, and it says, "And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away into the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names and blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots and Abomination of the Earth. There's a lot there. We're not going to get into every minutia today for sure, because I'm already very quickly running out of time. But we see this pause of this angel who had the vials. First of all, the importance of this angel whose previous job was to pour out the wrath of God, now stops, turns to John and says, I want to show you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth on many waters. So, to unpack some of the imagery here, right, some of the metaphors here, it's many waters, we've seen previously, means people, right? We've seen that many waters means many people. Is it an actual woman? No, right? It is a symbol of, and it's a very graphic symbol. I don't think I have to explain to you what great whore means, but a symbol of a woman of ill repute that has a wide understanding and a wide rule over a lot of people. The influence of this woman, or the great whore, has a lot of influence, right? That's how he starts. He says, let me tell you about Babylon. Right? That's basically what he turns and says, because that's how chapter 16 ends, is that the great Babylon came into remembrance, right? In verse 19. And I think that John probably didn't understand, and I still don't think that I do entirely, the importance of Babylon to the judgment of the world. And that's what I think these two chapters, the next two chapters, are going to explain to you. Just how important and how pervasive Babylon is in human nature and human culture, and how much it has spread to the masses. The first description he has of her is a great whore that sits upon many waters. It is a person of ill repute that has lots and lots of influence. Then he turns and says who she's had influence with, whom the kings of the earth have had committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Verse 2 basically means everyone is involved, from the kings to the people. It doesn't have any exclusion clauses here. It says the kings of the earth have committed fornication, the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. People have been deceived and are being deceived and are willingly following the great whore. That's who she is. He goes even more. He sets the table saying, this is who we're about to describe. And there's a couple other things that I want to focus on, because there's other imagery that shows up that we've already talked about as well. It says, so he carried me away into the spirit of the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names and blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. That should ring a bell, right? A beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. We've seen that previously in Revelation. So now you know who her alignment is with. You know the company that she keeps is with the beast. The beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. I could give you the verses where the beast is mentioned, but I'm pretty sure we know the beast is bad. The beast is Satan. The beast is the tool of the devil, right? This is Satan. The beast is someone that we have seen been beaten already by the vials, right? We've seen that the wrath is poured out upon the beast of his image and what he represents. But now we see that this woman, Babylon, is in conjunction with him, but definitely there's like a separation there, right? The beast has been used to bring people together, to supernaturally, I'm going to put that, I understand what I mean by that, supernaturally bring everybody under the rule. He's brought forth the image, he's brought forth Antichrist. He has brought forth all these things to fool the nations. And now this woman, Babylon, is sitting on the beast, fully reliant on the beast for everything. Fully mounted to be able to go where the beast wants her to go. That's how this is presented. So this woman, and we'll know who she is in verse 5 here coming up, but we see her position first, which is very important, right? The where she is, what she is doing, what she is wearing, the things she is holding, and we'll get more into that imagery a little bit more, I believe, next week. I don't have much time to get into those imagery about the golden cup and what she's wearing and things of that nature. I kind of want to go a little bit further to talk a little bit more, and then we'll kind of rehash some things, because there's a lot here, I think, to unpack. In verse 4 it says, "And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication." And we've seen that people have drank from the cup, right, already. In verse 2, so we know that this cup she is giving to the masses. In verse 5 it says, "And upon her forehead a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." So we know who this woman represents. This woman is Babylon. But my question to you real quick, and it's kind of just a real quick tidbit or a little bit rabbit trail. The first word, mystery. What does that mean? Why is the first word on her forehead mystery? To be a counterfeit. So my question to you is, what does a mystery represent in Scripture?
When we talk about the mystery of Jew and Gentile becoming one in the church.
Something that needs to be revealed.
Exactly. Something that requires discernment. A mystery is something that requires discernment. So unless you have discernment and are in the Scripture, or unless you are being revealed to this through God by looking, she will still be a mystery. That is one of her major aspects of herself, that Babylon is. And that's the first thing on her head. This is something that I have read a lot. This is something that I've gone over a lot and just kind of blew over to get to the other more juicy bits of everything else, to kind of get everything. But the first thing on her head is mystery. So I think it's important to talk about it. Right? That unless that you are searching for it, unless that you are actively aware of the danger that it proposes, unless you have discernment, you will not know. And that is the first attribute that is upon her head. It's a mystery. So how dangerous is that to the world? Very, extremely. And the next part is Babylon the Great. There's no doubt in our mind that or at least in my mind, that I can give that historical Babylon was an unbelievable human achievement. And again, I've kind of tried to convince you of how it's permeated history and how it's set up a lot of human foundational blocks for the way that we live today. For better or for worse, more likely for worse. But the first thing is that unless you could know, unless you had discernment, you would never know who she was or what she represented, and what the true meaning of her being there was. So unless you had discernment, you would not understand that Babylon the Great is the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. But that is on her forehead, right? So it's ready for everyone to see. That is what is available for others to really understand. I'm going to go even a little bit further to say that even though it tells you exactly what Babylon represents, or this woman represents, unless you have discernment, you will just let it go right past you. Even though it's very clear that she is the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, unless you have discernment, you will not care. Because that's the first thing on her forehead. And so, I personally believe the name on the forehead of, is there an actual physical transcription? Again, there's not an actual physical woman riding a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Again, this is all imagery for them to understand. But if you have discernment, it is very clear what Babylon stands for. Right? That is, I think, the overarching theme of what this means. Unless you have discernment, you will be both feet into Babylon's agenda. Unless you are actively working to understand where you are positionally, you will be with Babylon in this time. Right? And the discernment's given to you by God and things like that, but its condemnation of man is saying, if you have no discernment, you will be with the beast. Is basically how it's presented here, which I think is a very telling. Again, we've focused a lot on what man is like in this time with the Pharaoh's mindset of that they'll still be, we just finished them blaspheming God in chapter 16. So we know that this isn't a crazy assumption. But I think that this really solidifies that thought. That this really puts it in stone, saying, yeah, unless you're actively looking, you will not know that this is a counterfeit, that this is what they stand for, because it is a mystery first and foremost. And only revealed to you by discernment. So that's kind of the pervasive message, and we'll get into some of the minutiae of the colors and the gold and precious stones and pearls. We've already seen gold and precious stones previously in Revelation, decked on the ephods. Again, this is all counterfeits of things that God has put in place. Right? These are all counterfeits, and like my dad had mentioned, we'll see parallels to the things that God has put in place in heaven, right? Where we see the ephod and the gold and precious stone, the topaz, all these things that are used in positive lights in Scripture, right? Gold, precious stones, and pearls. These aren't things that we would look to as negative things. But because of where they're adorned and how they're being used is what puts the meaning behind them. That if you were just to look at it from the outside without any discernment, you would be fooled that this is somebody with power, authority, and that you should blindly follow because of the position. And then we'll talk again a little bit more about the beast. And you would be hard pressed, at least to me, to think that someone would follow a woman with the name the mother of harlots and abominations on a literal dragon. Say, that looks good, I should follow that. It's a lot more subtle than that, right? We've already shown that. It's a lot more subtle than a physical dragon or a physical beast. Yes, Don?
When somebody sits on a throne, that's a symbol of their authority. So I guess when she's seated on the beast, then it's saying that her authority is safe from punishment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and we know that the beast, and then the heads represent the hills, and there's kings that we've already talked about specifically. I have to map it all out and get it the normal. Go ahead.
So who is she?
She's Babylon. You disagree? Well, we'll have to talk about it next week because we have to go into.
Who's Babylon? What is it?
That's a loaded question. So she, and I think Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church more than likely. The facilities of that, the abilities for it to be that inclusive, that's kind of the way I see it. But Babylon, I think, is even more widely the world system that we use. I would say it's even more broad. That it's the mentalities of the day. It is the foundations that man has put in place, not God. That's what I would say Babylon is at this point. It's the worldview.
I don't disagree.
I'm just
I
messing.
think it's religion, and the catalyst is Catholicism.
Yeah.
But I think it's religion in chapter 17.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, I think we're saying the same things, but that's part of it. I would go even further to say it's everything to me.
I think chapter 18 is more political and economic.
And I think that's why I'm saying it's both, because it starts in religion and then goes political and economic. I think it's the world system. We're saying the same thing, but 17 is we're going to see the focus, like my dad has hinted at the religious aspect of it, of blindly following things, and then we'll look at chapter 18, the economic impacts of that. But those all come across, and it's things that we have seen throughout history before, right? A religious leader being in control of what you believe and how you are to act in your everyday life, right? It go through history of any major takeover of practically anything. They tell you what you can worship, when you can worship, and how you're to tax, how you're to act. These are your laws, these are everything. It's the worldview and the culmination of the political, economic, religious climate. That's what I think Babylon is. Babylon is this entity that we've readily accepted as a world that is so seated in everything that we do that when it comes to take over, we're just going to say, yeah, because we've been doing it already. It's just the small increments that we're allowing to supersede in all of the societies today. But that's who I think Babylon is. I don't know if that's any clearer, but it's something like that. No. I was going to get there. I never know when I was going to get there, but with that, we'll close and go into our Bible little Sunday school thing.